to you, Nigel.
Thank you, Sarah. Let me find that share button too. Everyone got a screen? Great. Thank you all for coming. My name's Nigel Hancock. I'm a project officer at Community Power Agency. I'm a Territory boy. I grew up in the Northern Territory, but eventually sort of uni and work forced me down south to settle down here. And I'm pretty new to Community Power Agency, but I've been in the community energy space for a little over 10 years. I've been involved in the starting of a couple of community energy groups, including Central Coast Community Energy here where I live on New South Wales Central Coast, and Pingala Community Energy, which I'll sort of talk about later as one of the models that as an example of one of the models of community energy that I use. So my role is to sort of help communities understand community energy, and Community Power Agency in general was founded along the lines of helping enabling communities to create their own community energy projects. Since then, it's grown a fair bit, and we now do policy work for state government, and we also collaborate with universities and institutions such as Beyond Zero Emissions, Moreland Energy Foundation, and Institute for Sustainable Futures. That's a mouthful. Institute for Sustainable Futures on guides and research projects and the whatnot. So we get involved broadly, but everything we do is about community energy and community benefit sharing around renewables and our energy system. So this is probably not something I need to convince everyone on this call about, but renewables is here. Renewables is the future, and it can only get bigger from here on. The recent shift in conversation, I suppose, both sort of at a state level, at least here, definitely here in New South Wales, but also at a federal level, around not if but when, really means that renewables will be a mainstay feature in the future energy mix. The question is, though, will it benefit communities? I'm sort of always of the opinion like renewables are great for the environment, but there's nothing sort of inherent about renewable energy that makes it also good socially and good for people, and for it to be done responsibly. It's sort of just that the people interested in low carbon technologies are also the people interested in social justice, but there's nothing inherent in renewables that make it community beneficial always. So we always ask the question, is the transition going to be fair? How can it help communities? What sort of opportunities are there for communities to get involved? And we'll sort of talk about that mostly through the rest of this presentation. And how can these projects enhance our sustainability goals, our social justice goals, our distribution goals and stuff like that as well. So there's a once in a lifetime, potentially once in a century opportunity here in an energy transition to not just transition to a low carbon economy, but also improve the way we do things. So it means that there's something has to be in between these two things. You've got the technology, you've got the ability to go low carbon. There's definitely now a shift towards investment in these technologies. Big companies, big hedge funds, big superannuation funds are now pouring money into this industry. But we want to make sure that people that live in the areas that these systems are being set up in, and also the technologies themselves are available to people. And this becomes a key consideration of all the planning that goes on around renewables. So it's about people, it's about the individual households, it's about the full communities, it's about the businesses and the economies and the industries that are connected to them. It's about being inclusive and allowing people who are locked out, meaning don't have direct access to, say, put solar panels on their own roof, or maybe certain programs are financially prohibitive for people. So making sure that there's inclusivity there, and working with communities that already have fossil fuels as a main industry to transition, and working with state or with local, state, and federal government on that transition to make sure it's planned correctly and with all of these people in mind. So we came up with the 4 Ds of community energy. I wouldn't call this a definition, but this is definitely sort of the vision that most, if not all, community energy groups have, with varying levels of weight on each one. So some communities may be focusing on decarbonisation and the transition to low carbon or zero carbon technologies. Other communities may be focusing on the decentralization of those, the sources of power, creating a little bit more robustness in the energy system, to mean that like there's no one central location where all of this is created or decided. And sorry, the decided one is in democratize. So distribution of that decision-making power, allowing more people to get involved and more opinions to be included in that decision-making process. And then ultimately, when there's a decision to be made, to make sure that as many people as possible have some say in that decision. So a lot of projects can focus on democratization of our energy system. And ultimately, we want to demonstrate that these technologies, but also these business models, like community energy models, work. So running pilot projects, putting in lots of volunteer hours in some cases to try and figure out a new model or make a model work in a new context, is sometimes a focus of these community energy projects. And like I said, doesn't have to be a focus on all of these at once, but generally these 4 things are what makes a community energy project in some measure and some mixture. So when we talk about community energy, sort of where are we in the whole industry of renewable energy? Where are we fitting? Generally, like household scale, that under 10 kilowatts, it doesn't really, it's a bit too small for community energy. It can be easily done by a household or maybe a couple. But the idea is that up until that like 6 or 10 kilowatt mark, generally is covered by households and small businesses. People who have those places to install solar generally can afford a system up to 6 kilowatts. And then on the other side of town, you've got the like hundreds of megawatts, large, like several hectares, if not 100 hectares of solar or large scale wind projects that are just so far beyond the ability for a community group to organize and finance that it's probably just a little bit too much at the moment. In saying that, in the US, there are community projects that are hundreds of megawatts, or at least the community projects are involved in those hundreds of megawatts projects. So, but generally in Australia, especially, there's a big gap between those 6 to 10 kilowatts that are on people's roofs, and I think people have probably seen a lot of the reporting. Over 2 million homes, 3 million homes by 2025 or something like that, I think the last estimate was. So that area has been covered. There is a lot of movement in that small household scale. Utility scale is what's coming up. The renewable energy zones and all the investment into large scale renewables. That's where that's where all the businesses and investment firms are looking, is in that sort of hundreds of megawatts. But there's a lot of space in this sort of like large rooftop systems, being like 10 to 100 kilowatts, and the small utility scale being 1 to 5 megawatts generally, where communities can quite happily get involved in the transition and have a very active and direct role in energy, and that's where community energy can fit in. So scale 10 kilowatts to 10 megawatts. Yeah, between 5 and 10 megawatts is a bit tricky because there's different regulations once you go over. Sorry, yeah, megawatts. I did use the right units. Once you go over 5 megawatts of generation, there's different rules for connection. But generally, still 10 megawatts is considered a small, not quite micro, but small solar farm in the utility size. So still and still very achievable for community groups. So, and when we're talking about these things, we're not just talking about solar. We are talking about things like biomass, biogas, hydro, wind, obviously. And now, actually, probably an update to this slide should be storage, and different types of storage, mostly like, yeah, pumped hydro, or potentially if there's a small enough scale project, or batteries, obviously. And community batteries are going to be something that we don't really have a lot of stuff about right now, but there's a couple of groups that are doing pilot projects. There's a bit of research being done, and I don't have anything to add to community batteries for this presentation, but hopefully very soon we'll have a lot of information about community batteries and what the possibilities in community batteries are for people to share in. So, just to give you a bit of Australian context, there were 3 groups in 2010. It was very much a burgeoning industry, and we do talk about community energy as an industry in its own right, and that's what CPA was set up for. And now we've got well over 150 projects. So community groups all spreading around Australia. Now, I don't know if this is just because we haven't heard from people, or because that map's a bit old, but I do notice that there are no far North Queensland pins. So hopefully this presentation might change that. And if you have already set up a community energy group, or you're thinking, or you'd like to, we'd love to put a pin there up in far North Queensland somewhere to represent even more geographic diversity in the community energy. So we don't need to digest all of this. I think this might be something you can go back to. I'm sure the slides or the recording, you can go back and pause this and have a look. But generally, this is just to show that community energy just isn't about the transition to renewables. It's really about taking all of these considerations and deciding what is important for your community in a project. Technology is always going to be a mix of that, but you've also got to make sure that there's an environmental, a political, a social element. And in a lot of projects, there's an economic return, though it's usually not the focus of it. It's usually sort of something we want to see those economic returns overlapping with something else in these charts. So yeah, I suggest people take a look at this in their free time, see where your community would fit in terms of seeing some of these outcomes and using community energy projects to develop them. So now I'll start getting into some examples. Now, community energy projects and community energy groups are very diverse. It's actually very, very hard to come up with kind of a definition of what community energy is. This is sort of our recent best crack at trying to define community energy. It might not fit exactly with all projects, but it definitely fits with like 99% of them. Yeah, we're looking generally at the supply side, meaning generating electricity. Then the demand side is projects around the consumption of electricity and reducing that, or converting it to something that's or converting consumption from a fossil fuel to an electricity. So electrification of heating, for example, is a demand side activity. And then there's the larger community-based approaches to sort of all of community planning and stuff like that that people engage in. So yeah, well, the first one we'll look at is sort of well, this can be supply side or demand side. So bulk buys, lots of different examples of different bulk buying programs. I think most people are sort of familiar with the concept of bulk buy. You get a group of people together so you can get a cheaper price on a larger purchase or order. Also usually in conjunction with sort of like an arrangement with an installer or a contractor to install the solar that you buy or the new hot water systems that you buy. Also, there's bulk buy of electric vehicles is becoming a popular one as well. So just because we're not talking about producing renewable energy doesn't mean this isn't a community energy project, because all of these things are relating to how people use energy. And bulk buy is usually a good way to get a conversation started around what a community can do to either look at or change how it uses energy. It even just making like getting together to buy electric vehicles and put in an electric vehicle charging station in your local community is a community energy project. So don't just, we've sort of got to get out this idea that it's just about solar or just about producing energy. It's also about how we use it and how we engage with the energy system as well. So one thing though with bulk buys is they tend to have like a finite project like thing. Like once everyone's bought solar hot water systems, you need to go to a different place in order to do that bulk buy again. So usually this is a good conversation starter, a good start to a community energy project, by getting together for a bulk buy and then using the cohesion from that to go on and do other projects as well, or other bulk buys or something like that. So the investment models. So this is where I said, like, there are models for economic return for it to get financial returns. So Pingala's up there. Like I said, that's an organization I'm involved with, but there's also all different types of models for investment. This in itself is a whole different presentation for the different business models, the different structures, like the different business structures you can use. Pingala uses a cooperative, Clear Skies uses trusts, and Repower, I think, uses a company model. Or another good example of this would be SolarShare in the ACT in Canberra, who uses a company model. So lots of different models to work with, lots of different types of returns, ranging from just like, the idea is that you do a project, you put your money in, you get your money back and maybe a little bit extra, but really the project is more about getting more solar or getting more renewables out there, or getting more investment out there, not so much the returns. Right through to some of Clear Sky's projects do give quite good returns, like very, very high value returns. So Big variety. It depends what you're trying to achieve. Yeah, lots of different ways of going about this. So again, if this is something that you wanted to look at, there's a whole rabbit hole of information to dive into along this. And Community Power Agency has a guide on this, and I think I've got the link at the end for it. And also the Victorian government has a guide on this and community energy in general, but there's a lot of focus on these investment models in those guides. So. Revolving loans, revolving funds, similar sort of structure to the investment model, except the idea is that there is no funds that are given back to the people who put in money. All the money goes back into the fund in order to do more projects. So structurally can be very similar to the investment models, but fundamentally the idea is to reinvest all of the money that's returned from projects into new projects, and that just revolves around in this fund. Sometimes the funds grow, in that I think the core fund, the idea is that some businesses have to pay a little bit extra and they grow the fund, whereas Corina, the fund doesn't grow unless there's more donations. So they have Corina has zero interest loans for their renewable energy loans, and the fund only grows if there's donations into it. So how are we going for time? Okay, speed up a little bit. A new model, which I'm also involved in through Pingala, is the community garden, or as federal Labor government now wants to call them, solar banks. Don't ask me why. They just decided they wanted a new name. So this is a little bit different in that you have a community group who are investors. So there is an investment element to it, but there's also a generation and grid sort of sale of electricity element to it. But ultimately, the thing that really differentiates solar gardens is the idea that a solar garden plot is meant to mimic the idea of having rooftop solar, or at least gross metering rooftop solar, and to feel like having a solar system on your roof by putting an on-bill credit. So the difference between the investment models usually and the solar gardens model is the solar garden model has an on-bill credit on the electricity retailer bill. So that's a bit of a difference, but it's a new model that we're just developing now, despite it being around in the US for several years now, for about 6 years in the US. So. Larger investment models, the other investment models I talk about are usually smaller on the roofs of businesses. Now we're talking into that grid connected scale. So a solar share I already mentioned, as the one in Canberra had a 2 megawatt system. Yes, I think it was a 2 megawatt system, and then there's a lot of examples of wind farms as well that are in this scale as well, because you can't put a wind turbine, at least these ones you can't, on your roof. So most wind farms are grid connected. So this is just scaling up. This is just a bigger scale of project. You do need quite a lot of expertise and time and funding to do one of these projects. They are not easy, but very worthwhile when you can get a large scale renewable energy project up in your community. And yeah, big shout out to Hepburn Wind, which was one of the first, if not the first, grid connected community energy project, and one of the very, very early community energy projects in Victoria, in Australia, but they're located in Victoria. The second last type of project. This is very similar to the grid connected projects, but the project is owned by someone else, not the community. This is when we're talking into that utility scale, and communities co-invest. Maybe they invest they provide 10% of the funding, 20% of the funding, 50% of the funding for a large scale project. Sapphire Wind is a good example in Australia. The best example of this is actually the wind farm outside Copenhagen. If anyone's flown in or out of the airport, there you see a large wind farm, which is 10% community owned, and it's mandated in Denmark to have that amount of community ownership in these large scale infrastructure projects. So very much an option. The barrier here is that it isn't a common way for companies to seek funding, and it's not. It's really about finding a project, finding a developer who wants this, and have those conversations with them early on. But it is becoming more popular. It is growing because of the community connection and the amount of social license that community investment can bring to a project. The final type of community project is sort of whole community planning, we call it. This is really where a whole town or section of a town, a community, get together and do all of the things we just talked about and maybe some extra. Looking at their demand side, can they do bulk buys? Looking at their supply side, where can they install rooftop solar or rooftop systems, but then also have grid connected generation as well to supplement their own consumption in the town. Microgrids fit into this, community batteries fit into this, but really the focus of this is not just like the one project. So it's not just a bulk buy, then a community, and then an energy project, and then this and then that. The idea is that all of the projects have an overarching planning attached to it, and they're all done in unison. So you're installing renewable energy systems, and you're reducing your demand to match what those renewable energy systems can deliver, to make your community net zero or zero carbon into perpetuity. Very big undertaking, and there's some successes and there's some new projects coming up. But again, this is also community energy. This is something that that a lot of communities, especially if you're in a community, which I'm assuming a lot of people in the far north Queensland would be, that are end of line. That means that they're at the very end of an electricity distribution line, often impacted by things like natural disasters, taking out transmission, or just maintenance and general degradation, causing blackouts and brownouts. So those sort of places, this is where it's becoming more popular. I would say that there is also a shift with networks to start asking communities to do this, because and it's a little bit of it's a little bit of just sort of shoving off community and saying, you're too difficult to deal with, you just like create a microgrid so we don't have to deal with you anymore, which is a real shame, but might create some opportunities for communities to really plan out their own future. And that's where the real difference comes in. Like, if a utility saying, oh, we're going to put in a couple of batteries and a solar farm, and then you're on your own, is a very different proposition to a community getting together and actually planning what they want in terms of a microgrid. So that's what we advocate for. The community is able to plan it out themselves from the get-go, and not being just disconnected basically from the rest of the network because it's too expensive to operate those distribution lines. One special mention is community energy retailing, of which unfortunately there is now only one example. Indigo Power is the example, though actually Co-Power, which is starting up also in Victoria, is a new one that have just recently started. I'm not sure if they started taking on customers yet. I will leave Anova up there because even though Anova went into administration a couple of weeks ago, the reason why they went into administration had nothing to do with the fact that they were a community-owned organization. In fact, they were going quite strongly as a community-owned organization. The reason why they went into administration is because they're a small organization, and the changes that the AEMO made to the energy market made it impossible for them to continue operating as a very small organization. And they weren't the only retailer to go into administration. There were 4 others that I know of that have been reported so far. The other 4 were just companies, and unfortunately Anova was just a small community-owned one that got caught up in all of that. So still very much, Anova's still very much a good example of community energy retailing, and another type of project, though it is a bit of a special mention because it is very, very specific in how it's set up. So generally, all of these projects, we want them to create social value, not take away from it. It should build trust, build relationships. That includes all the ones that have commercial partners. It's not just about being a partner in a corporate social responsibility project. It's about having a relationship and trust, and have a bit of a say in what's being happening in your community as well. So all of these sort of things are good indicators of when a project is being operated as a good community energy project, or at least community engagement is being done well. It should be authentic. Benefits should be shared with the local community, and they should be shared in a way that's practical to the community as well. There's no point having a revolving fund for a cricket a cricket club when there's not that much interest in cricket in the region. Sorry if there's any cricketers in the audience. Just an example. So yep. This is one thing that community power agency is really advocating for at the moment. We're also running courses on this for developers to understand how this works better, to do community engagement better, and to change the culture within the industry. Because like I said, there's nothing inherently socially just or community beneficial about renewable energy investment. It's only if we make it a part of the culture that it remains beneficial to the community. I have one example of a solar farm that did a good job of this. How are we going for time, Sarah? Do you want me to wrap up, or?
No, you've got a few more minutes. Thanks, Nigel.
Okay, cool. So I'm not sure where this came from. I think we Community Power Agency did have a relationship with Caradoc, but I personally I don't work from them. This is not a shout out to them. This is just an example that we had lying around that I could use as a sort of an example of sort of some of the community engagement that they do. Seen as positive impact for the local economy. They really focused on sort of finding good benefit sharing opportunities for the local community, and yeah, so it was quite a large one, over 100 megawatts. Like I said, this is very much in the utility company scale side. 350,000 panels. Like you really need to go and see one of these places to just understand how many panels there are in order to produce 100 megawatts of electricity. Thankfully, Australia has a lot of space. Yeah, 150 hectares. And the real benefit sharing was around local employment for that region. Yeah, a lot of long-term unemployment, and the real focus was Indigenous employment and upskilling, and and connecting local opportunities in the solar farm with jobs, and making sure that they do follow through with a lot of upskilling of those employees, and not just sort of a one and done sort of project. But another example would be the New England Solar Farm in Urella, which was more around creating a community fund that can be used for activities within the community. So this was something more useful to the community of Urella, providing $50,000 to begin with, and then sort of scaling that up year on year, and then that can be used. What does it say? Oh, it says, yeah, grant. I was going to say most likely in the form of grants to local community projects that might be, say, yeah, one-off upgrade to the sporting club. There we might have a cricket club that does need a little bit of TLC, and then other spending on other things within the community that are not associated directly with the solar farm itself, but actually identified by the community as things that are needed. So that was the benefit sharing that that was designed not for the community, but with the community. And that's the key difference between good community engagement and good benefit sharing and poor benefit sharing, is being able to say that this was co-designed, this is what the community actually needs. Yeah, just generally, we could go very much now into sort of things like federal policies and renewable energy zones. But actually, I think I'm just going to skip over this and sort of ask you maybe come back to your community a little bit, think about the sort of the smaller projects we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. And maybe when we have a Q&A session, I'd really like to hear about what excites you about the idea of community-owned energy or community energy. And I forgot to remove Combine from that thing, but that was something we asked the people at Combine, like what opportunities do you see in your community? And then, yeah, we'd be interested if you are looking to do this process further. Community Power Agency is always open to chatting to groups trying to set up community energy projects and providing assistance. So it's maybe take a screenshot just at some of the places that you can find more information, or information that particularly Jara wrote. You'll see Jara Hicks there a lot. She's one of the founders of Community Power Agency, has provided a lot of sort of research into, actually I should say Dr. Jara Hicks now, because she's got a doctorate in exactly this, in community benefit sharing and engagement. So have a look at some of these. That second one, can I highlight? I don't think can you guys see my mouse? The second one here, how-to guide of community power. That's our guide on community energy and how to set up a community energy group. And like I said, there's another one from the Victorian government as well. So Sarah, I think I'll hand back to you.
Thanks so much, Nigel. That's fantastic. I think what's really struck me is that there's heaps more types of community power than I'd really thought of. And I really feel like the opportunity in this model is that it's the community driving the scale up of renewable energy, which I think our community probably really wants. I wanted people to now feel like they could turn the video on so we can see each other. And I've got one question from Stuart here already that I'd like to ask Nigel, but if anyone else has questions I'd like to ask, if you just indicate with your, I think you can put your hand up with the reactions, or type it into the chat, that'd be great. But just to start with, Stuart's asked, actually Stuart, do you want to ask your own question? Do you want to put your video on and ask your own question? Where is he?
You're on mute, Stuart.
Yeah, I was just doing as I was told and being on mute.
Thank you very much for doing that during the webinar.
No, thank you. So thank you, Nigel. The kind of key question really is around, you know, kind of from your experience and seeing these kind of groups being set up around the country, what do you see as the kind of key success ingredients for these groups to be, you know, successful? Because it's not just getting a project up and running, but it's effectively, it's a long-term ownership and operation of a lot of these sorts of models. So how do you ensure that these things are successful in the short and long term?
One of the things is probably important for the short and long term, but like has different things that you need to do, and that is around the capabilities and experience of the people involved. So one thing I've really noticed about a lot of the very successful community energy groups is you have people either that are from the renewable energy industry or have experience. Maybe they have legal experience or financial experience, and they can really support the organization with that experience. Now, I understand that not everyone has an ex-lawyer, an ex-accountant, an ex-engineer, and an ex-governance guru just sitting around waiting to help organize a project. And that's kind of where people like Community Power Agency come in, but also we're advocating for community hubs to be set up around Australia that have this expertise. But it's really something an organization, when you're trying to get set up, to think about, where am I going to get this expertise? Where am I going to get this information? Where am I going to get the advice I need to set up one of these projects? And then when the project is being planned, ask exactly the same question, but with different results. Like who is going to be operating it, and do we have capability to do it ourselves, or do we need to outsource that somehow? So a good example of, for example, kind of outsourcing it is Clear Sky Investments in North Sydney. They had a partnership with a solar company who obviously does all the installation, but they also do all the monitoring and billing and everything for their systems. And obviously the company gets a cut for that. But that was something Clear Skies identified. They're like, we have the expertise to set up the project. We have the expertise to engage with the businesses, to find the sites and negotiate and set up the trusts and stuff like that. That's the model they're using. But we don't have the capabilities to monitor and bill and maintain the systems. So we're going to find a relationship that allows us to do that. So that's probably the first thing, like asking at the setup stage, and then also at the project stage, like, what are our capabilities? What are we prepared to do? And who do we need to find if we can't do it ourselves? The other thing, I suppose, it would be, don't try and reinvent the wheel a little bit. There are lots of different models. Lots of different groups have set up templates and had grants to set up templates or example contracts and stuff like that. So definitely phone around, look for things to make your life easier. There'll be someone with a memorandum understanding template somewhere. There'll be someone with a power purchase agreement template somewhere. There'll be someone with a loan agreement template somewhere. There'll be someone with a construction contract template somewhere. So definitely, like, don't think you need to do it in isolation. Just pick up the phone, call any community energy group. I'm putting everyone in community energy on the spot now to say we're all really friendly and really helpful. And I'm sure if you called up someone from another community energy group and say, hey, we saw you did a project, we want to do something similar. Can you share some of how you did that? They're definitely going to help you out.
Thanks, Nigel. Do anybody else have questions they want to ask? Yep. Admin, sorry, I don't know. Haven't got a name for you. Please introduce yourself and
I haven't fixed the computer. Hugh Spencer, Cape Tribulation. We have the exact opposite situation. We are not grid connected. We do not have the interconnects between the properties, and we're having an attempt by the government to impose a system on us. So we're in a totally opposite situation to you. In fact, it's interesting because the assumption is, with everything I've heard so far, is that everybody is already have been grid connected. The interconnects are there. All the houses are on the connect. And so it's really a matter of substituting an energy source for another energy source. So there's a lot of places in Australia which don't have that. And is there any way in which this, that the community, I mean, we don't even have much of a community as far as, everybody is like going in all possible directions, which is a shame. But the community was never involved in the planning or anything else. In fact, they were excluded from it, which was very sad. Any suggestions? Because I'm sure there are other places like this in which we're looking at an area. This is the Daintree coast, which is from basically the Daintree River to Cape Tribulation, which is about 40 odd kilometers and probably about 600 properties, plus a number of very heavy potential users, which are tourist cafes and things like that, which are very energy hungry. Any bright ideas how one can deal with this one? It's a very tricky problem, and we're in the middle of battling this because the whole situation has been so seriously badly done and planned, and we don't quite know. We would love to have a community one. We'd like to have something like that, but we still have the problem of the interconnects between the building. And this is a rural area where people might be kilometers apart. What do you do?
Well, there's no simple answer to what do you do, but I think the beginning is that, and this might sound easier than it actually is, because I don't really know what the relationships are up there between everyone, but you need to be a community. You need to be organized as a community, to be talking to the operators up there and to the government as a community. And we see that it really makes a difference when there is some community organization around these topics. There is an association set up, or there is organized meetings. There is someone there that says, all right, we're going to catch up every second Thursday at this town hall, and then this town hall, and then this town hall. If you've got such diverse geographies, there might be multiple locations, and someone's organizing all that. And that makes a really big difference, because then once you've got that organization, you can actually start to make a plan about what the community does actually want. Because unfortunately, a lot of this bad planning and the imposed situations comes about because government doesn't know how to talk to a dispersed group, which sounds a bit ironic considering we've got a democracy with voting. But government really doesn't know how to talk to a dispersed group. They need an organization to talk to, and there also needs to be sort of a singular planning arrangement for the region, because again, collective bargaining, unfortunately, is the name of the game in this sector. The more people you can have, the more weight you can have with the networks and with government. The reality is that you have to do it as a group, which is harder because companies don't have to always do that. But that's the sector we live in. What's the word I was thinking? Amalgamate, coordinate, and then there's another one. I'm trying to think back to this seminar I did. Anyway, I'm sure that there's another really good letter after that, but I can't remember what it is. But yeah, that's really what you need to do. You need to get together as a community and use that collective bargaining to make a plan and create some change.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Nigel. Does anyone else have questions they want to ask? While you're thinking about it, I just wanted to highlight, I also noticed before we contacted you to do this seminar, that lack of any community power projects outside of the southeast Queensland, and I wondered if you thought there was anything in that, because in our region, we only have one energy supplier. If you think that's been an impediment to community power, yeah, I'm interested in your thoughts on that, because it doesn't appear that there's any outside of anywhere other than southeast Queensland.
I don't think having one energy supplier is any impediment. The Northern Territory has one community, it has two community energy groups that I know of, that also have done a lot of community energy projects. Even though they're not community energy groups, there's a lot of Indigenous communities that have basically in a similar situation to Hugh, sort of disconnected from the main grid, have interconnectors between the homes, just operating off either their individual diesel generators or one diesel generator that powers several homes. And they've got together as, because they have their local land corporations, they've got together sort of to do energy projects that aren't sort of traditionally called community energy projects, but are very, very similar to community energy projects. So I don't think having like one network, one retailer, anything like that, that's probably more an issue if there is if you're trying to do something really fancy around peer-to-peer trading or virtual power plants, or some of those sort of more very leading edge projects, the things that actually are just being developed in their concepts at the moment, if not even actually in practice. I think probably one of the bigger things is that a lot of the community energy groups started in metropolitan areas where people are just closer. It's easier to have a conversation when you live a stone's throw away, and you don't have to travel, and you don't have to travel 2 kilometers. Like 10 people don't have to travel 2 kilometers to get to the one town hall or something like that. So we definitely see that regional areas and places where people are more dispersely populated don't have as many community energy groups, because everyone does feel like they're kind of doing it alone, and there isn't that ease of organization that you do get in metropolitan areas. In saying that, there's very successful community energy projects out of small towns and stuff like that. Yakandanda is a good example of that. It might not be a small place from sort of Northern Territory, North Queensland standards, but it is a relatively small community. And yeah, that's, so there are counter examples to that, but I would just say that it's probably more the geography and the dispersed nature of far North Queensland that means that it's a bit harder to do these sort of projects and get organised and stuff.
Yeah, thanks for that, Nigel. Dave, you mentioned before in the chat about was it Miller or Melander and a microgrid project? Did you want to ask about that?
Yeah, look, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for your presentation, Nigel. It's been very informative. I just wanted to highlight the fact that Miller Lions Club have been working in conjunction with University Queensland for the last 18 months or thereabouts about a microgrid project to try and assist with energy resilience during times of disaster, just as Nigel's mentioned. Now, first step of that was to a certain community appetite to see whether they wanted to be involved, and we had a very strong showing at a community forum. If this proceeds, which we are just going through the logistics of it all, it could be used as the pilot project for community-based resilience around Australia. So it's really got some important undertones towards it. I think the community are becoming more accepting of what is proposed and understanding of what a battery may mean. One of the big things community was asking, is it something that the local government was going to take on board? I believe it should be a community run initiative rather than putting the burden back on local government.
Thanks for that, Dave. And Nigel, do you have any advice for the Miller group?
one thing I would say is, I don't know if you know this already, but there's very similar projects sort of starting to happen in Victoria as well, off the back of the Black Saturday bushfire grants. So they had access to funding to do a lot of these projects. I'm not sure how much you guys have access to as well, but definitely have a look around for these projects in Victoria, because you might be able to help each other out. It sounds like actually you're more advanced in some ways than some of those projects, but also some of these projects have funding to do research. So you might want to connect with some of them to see if you can get access to that research when it's done. It might really help you out. I suppose it would be, without sort of going into the weeds of the project and stuff like that. It depends whether you're talking about a microgrid where you have multiple sites connected to the one form of generation, or you're sort of talking about like a location in the community that is set up to be resilient in a natural disaster. Very, very, very interesting. It's also, again, it's something sort of new that only a few groups have done before or are doing now. So probably not much more advice, because we want to see what happens with these projects and get the learnings out of them and stuff like that. So
that's great to hear. There's something local in that moving in that direction already. I didn't know about that one, Dave. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. Is there any other last questions? Because we've just gone over time. Be happy to take one more question before we finish up.
Yeah, I've just got more of a comment than a question, really. If you're aware of the Bushlight installations that a lot of people have up in the Cape, I was just curious on how Nigel Hancock sees that in the context of this program. Of course, a small homestead surrounded by outbuildings is a lot smaller than a community project, but they're really quite advanced systems for remote areas. And I mean, for me, they're quite exciting to see how a whole community might be 3 generations and 5 family names in the one area. They've got a centralized array of up to probably anywhere from 25 to 50 panels, and a centralized battery system and everybody then needs to use that resource sustainably and not suck too much juice at night until they recharge again. So just curious on Nigel's thoughts on those systems.
Well, like, I suppose there's a lot of probably unknown community energy projects, sort of like you say, that have just been set up within a small group of families or between a couple of homes. Definitely sort of those sort of systems, I suppose, could, if those people are interested, really help out or really inform a lot of the design around microgrids, because they understand what is practical and what is useful for an individual living on an independent system. Like, a lot of these microgrid projects have been designed by engineers, and they match load profiles, and they do generation estimates and consumption estimates and frequency control estimates and stuff like that. But I think, those sort of systems actually should be the ones we should be like talking to. The people who operate those systems are the ones we should be talking to find out what the practical considerations are. It might be one thing to say to people, you can't use the hot water system during these hours, but is that really practical when you have a 4-year-old? And what happens if you and how do you deal with that if you do? So that would be my response, is that actually it would be nice to talk to a lot of those people, rather than actually sort of say to them, this is how community energy is done. I feel they've done it, and we want to make sure that we can find out how they were successful to help other communities.
Yeah.
It says here on their site they put in 130 systems between 2002 and 2013. But I've just posted the link in there.
Okay, I'll look them up. Thanks.
Yeah, I was actually going to say, I did some master's research on the Bushlight renewable energy system. So they were put in Indigenous communities all over the remote communities as a way of balancing diesel power generation that was otherwise being done. And that was driven through a remote area power system investment. I think it was federal government investment. I don't think that's around anymore. That's why it was done at that time. So that was led by the Centre for Appropriate Technology, which is an Indigenous organisation that comes out of Alice Springs. And actually, it probably is something that the community power group should be connecting with. I think it would be good to understand how those things have worked in those communities.
Sorry, I didn't realise you were talking about Bushlight. we do talk to them, and we have got information from them. And yeah, I suppose like these aren't considered typical community energy projects because they were very much organised and funded by a program. But they're actually probably a very good example of when a program is organised and funded at the top, but really takes into good consideration community consultation and incorporates that back into the project as it's operating. That was the real strength of Bushlight, in my opinion, is they were able to incorporate the feedback they got from the community and really adjust the project as it went on to fit those communities.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear that you're already connected to that. I think we probably need to finish up now. We're about 6 minutes over, but we'll just check there's no other questions. But I want to thank you, Nigel, for your time today, and thank everybody for coming. I'd encourage you to look at the Community Power Agency's website and the range of resources that have been provided, and we will put a copy of this webinar on a link on our website and the webinar itself on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to look up some of those resources. So thank you again, everybody. Hope to see you again for another climate webinar in another month or two. We'll let you know what that is. Take care.
Thanks all. Good night.